Okay, so I'm getting ready to do my big batch of dough for my artistic scoring workshop. So I am making 14 dough boules, B-O-U-L-E-S, that's like the round shaped dough, for participants to score their flowers on. And I thought I would walk through it a little bit today. So what I'm doing is I've already got 5,600 grams of flour in here. That's enough for my base to have about 400 grams of flour per loaf, which is slightly less than my usual size. So I make these ones just a smidge smaller. And then the other thing I have in here is salt, 112 grams. So I get all of that pre-mixed in here the night before to save time. My big starter is ready to go. I'll show that in a second. But first thing I do is I add water. So I'm going to be adding about 3,920 grams of water. I use some that's cold from my fridge, and then I also warm a little bit up in the microwave just to bring the temp of the dough up, because that will help it ferment a little quicker and just give it some better taste. From what I've heard, when you use warmer dough, warmer water, and the temperature is warmer as it ferments, that can impact taste. So often I like to try and keep it warmer if I can. And that's just a little trick of warming up the water I've learned how to do. So let's go ahead and start to get the water in. I've got 2,000 grams right here. In it goes. And then I'm gonna do just a smidge less than 2,000 on top of that. Okay, all of my water is in. And now it's time to add the star of the show. Look at that, so beautiful. Hopefully you can see all those beautiful bubbles and jiggle. I've never done the trick where you slam it down. Let's try that, it's kind of fun. Let's see, I don't know how people do this. Something like that. Not nearly as cool looking as when the micro bakeries do it. I need practice, but in she goes. This is gonna be 1,120 grams. So what I'm actually gonna do is some negative weight to help me make sure that I get the right amount in. It should be almost this whole thing, with just enough left for me to keep as my mother. Let's check. 1,155. That's okay if I'm a little over. Excellent. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to get the last bit that's in here, put it into this jar, and that will be my mother. And I'm gonna give it a little time since it just peaked, and then I will feed this. So I'll be able to have more of it and keep it going perpetually. So here we go. Even just that tiny little bit is totally okay to have. And I'll feed this in a while. Let's mix. All right. So I'm just gonna get my hands on this and go, oh, actually, excuse me, I'm gonna use my spatula first. I like to mix a little first with the spatula, and then I get my hands in here. So I'm just scraping down the sides. And I wanna take a minute to talk a little bit here about using a mixer to do this. So I recently received the Bosch, I think that's how you say it, mixer. And what I will say is, if you are a micro bakery doing this all the time, this would be really, really hard on you physically. And that's where I see a mixer coming in handy. What I found though is I'm only doing this once a week, if that, not even typically that. So for me to do, because you can only fit in that mixer about 7 loaves, dough for 7 loaves. What I found was I was having to do it twice, load it up, pre-measure everything, mix it, scrape it out into here, and then do it again. And I found this just saves me more time to mix by hand. So I don't know if I'm gonna be using one. I don't think I will be. And honestly, the mixer does give you really good dough texture, but I like touching the dough and mixing it. I think there's just something very therapeutic about it and nice about feeling your dough. So that is why I'm choosing to mix by hand. However, like I said, if I was a micro bakery and cranking out more, I'd absolutely use one. I'm also really excited because I'm supposed to get the new uni mixer sent to me. And once I get that one, I kind of want to see how that one is for ease of use. The Bosch just had some kind of elements in it that stick in the middle. The, I don't know what you call it, the metal arm, I guess, that mixes. And cleaning and just digging the dough out was a little bit wonky, so I didn't like it as much. Okay, so now what I'm doing is I've got my hands in here, and I first kind of just get everything a little more cohesive, and then I break it into 2 bundles and work one at a time, so it's a little more manageable. And I am just mixing and wiping off on my hands, and I'll show you how I clean my hands. I've had some people say, don't you waste a bunch of dough mixing by hand? I don't. I get all this off. So, but I'm scraping the flour, the dry flour, off the sides and putting it in. And eventually, I kind of get like a cat-like motion going to get this dough all incorporated. And I'll use the spatula to scrape the sides down a bit to get some more of that golden dough off the side. Fun fact, I'm turning my camera on and off with my nose. My nose is my stage hand, my assistant. I wanted to now show I'm mixing the other side. That one's pretty mixed, but I'll go back and mix them both together in a minute. But while I struggle to breathe and mix this side, I wanted to talk through bulk fermentation a little bit with these big batches of dough and how I monitor and manage that. So there is an extremely helpful chart by Tom Kakuza from the Sourdough Journey. He did multiple experiments to gauge bulk fermentation, where he looks at 2 variables to help him, which is percentage rise of your dough and the volume, percentage rise, and then also temperature and time, so 3. And what he did was he created a chart from experimenting where he was able to kind of come up with a prediction on, if you look at a certain target percentage rise, temperature, and time, those 3 variables will come together to tell you when your dough should be shaped and put into the fridge for cold proof. So it's extremely helpful. However, he cautions it's for his exact recipe, his starter. So you have to still use all of your senses and what you know of your starter and your flour that you're using, all of those variables to help you still call when the bulk fermentation's done. But with that said, I use the chart as a starting point. And so I know, just from looking at it a lot, that if your dough is 75 degrees, it's gonna be, I believe, now as I say I know, I believe that it's 7 hours is about what it is, and target percent rise, I believe, is 30%. So I used to really pay attention to the target percent rise, and then I found it was really hard to measure that for me. I kind of know visually though, when I make dough in a bowl, what that looks like. For this big batch, it's a little trickier. So what I do is I use temperature and time to help me. So I take the dough's temp, and that gives me an estimate on how long it should ferment. And then I use visible signs. So I'm looking for, has my dough significantly grown? Is it jiggling? Do I see bubbles? I smell it, and the smell should be fruity and slightly tangy, maybe a little bit of an alcohol smell, but it shouldn't be so intense that it's extremely acidic. That is gonna be too much. So I use smell to help me. But those are some of the variables. And just doing this multiple times, that will help you get used to calling it, because you are gonna start to know how your starter behaves. And the only other thing I change with these big batches is typically big batches of dough just stay warmer and they have a little bit more of that, you know, yeast and bacteria colony, because you have so much starter in here that they'll go a little faster. And so I usually like to call it about a half hour before I normally would. That also gives me time to shape all of this and get it into the fridge, because you have to put that variable into play. So really, what I end up doing is I start shaping like an hour before I want it to go into the fridge, because that gives me time to account for that it ferments a little quicker, and then also time to account for the fact that I need to shape it all, which takes me about 30 to 40 minutes with this amount. So lots of things to keep in mind. Best thing as always is just do it. Practice. Honestly, diving in to give it just a try. I think you'll be surprised at how it's actually not so scary. Okay, so both sides are mixed. Now what I do is combine them. Arm day. And then I'll mix a little more. So total mixing this, I would say, start to finish, adding all the water, starter, and the mixing is about probably like 20 minutes. So I only mix for about, I'd say like 10 or 15 of that. And then it'll sit and we'll do stretch and folds. Okay, so I now have this all mixed, and I mix until there's no more dryness. It feels really cohesive and smooth. And now I'm just kind of getting the bits of dough that are on the edges and the sides, so it's all together. It's important to keep as much of the dough as you can, because that weight is what you're gonna calculate and use to divide into 14 with. So if you're off by a lot, it can affect making your dough balls even. But if it's just a little, it's okay. And now I wanted to show how, I mean, first of all, they're a lot cleaner. And I show you, oh my gosh, I'm like out of breath. Like, I swear I started working out again. Katrina Scott, I did start working out again, but man, this arm day is really what you need in the KSL app as a workout. Dough day. It's really awesome. Forearm and bicep and hand work. But anyway, I wanted to show how I get the dough more thoroughly off my hands. So I just kind of scrape it like that, so it's mostly off. And then, so see, look, not much waste at all. And then it'd be like the same as your spatula or your bin. What I do is I get a little bit of dry flour in my hands and rub it like I'm washing them over the trash can. And the dry flour with the wet will kind of pull it and peel it off, and you end up with pretty darn clean hands, and then you just wash. So really clever hack. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just cover this and let it sit. Since I have a little more time today, I'm gonna do 40 minutes in between my folds. So I'm gonna let it sit for 40 minutes and then come back and do a fold. The other thing I noticed is sometimes when you use multiple bags of flour, even the same brand bought in one batch, some of the flour is just milled differently, or the wheat berries were a little different. So it absorbs more water between batches or less water. I've noticed that. And this one, like same calculations of hydration, but I did this a few weeks ago and it was really easy to mix and felt a lot more hydrated, even though it was 70% hydration. You will notice as you continue to work with flour that that can change. This time, this feels like it was like way firmer and not absorbing as much water. So this feels, it's 70% as well, but it feels like it's at like 67%. It was a lot tougher to mix. So just something to pay attention to. You could always add more water to account for it, but in this case, it's for the workshop. Lower hydration is actually better for beginners. So And we're scoring on it, so that's actually a factor as well. Lower hydration is better for the scoring. So yeah, I'm gonna cover it, let it sit for 40 minutes, and then come back to do a stretch and fold. One more step before I'm gonna let it sit between for stretch and folds. I'm gonna take the temperature, and this is just a meat thermometer. I probably got it years ago on Amazon, but I stick it into the center, and I'm gonna get what the temperature is because that will give me a ballpark idea of how long it needs to ferment for. But again, I'm using other signs as well, visual cues, smell, what I know about how mine ferments. Mine, I think, is usually takes like a little longer than Tom's on the chart. This is at like 73 degrees. Cool. So I'm gonna note that. And that's a good spot. When it's down towards like 70, that's where I'm like, ooh, I try to want it warmer if I can, but it's tough with the big batches to control that. So 73, and then I'm gonna cover this, and what I do is I note it on this lid. So I have on here how many grams per loaf I'm gonna weigh later, but I like to note when I start. So bulk fermentation started at about 9:15 a.m. and it was at 73 degrees, and that will help me keep track. And if you are looking for a big bin like this, I have this big bin and a lot of other items that I use for my workshop prep under the workshop tools list in my Amazon storefront. So you can check there. I have the lid, the bin. It's great. I've used this for years and really like it. Okay, we'll come back to this in about 40 minutes. About to start my next stretch and folds, but wanted to take a minute to show the chart I referred to earlier by Tom Kakuza, the Sourdough Journey. So it is as you can tell, multi-page document. So there is a lot more to it than just this chart. So I highly recommend reading the whole thing, but I am going to link this in the description. It's extremely helpful for understanding bulk fermentation. I'll link this, and I will also link my Amazon storefront with things like my bins and other workshop tools in the description as well. It's been 40 minutes and I'm gonna do a stretch and fold, the first one. So I just have some water to wet my hands, towel to protect our wood table, and I'm gonna do my first fold. And I can already smell how good it smells. So I get my hands good and wet, and I go around the edges and just scrape and loosen first. After this first fold, I'll show you from this angle, and then I will show the remaining folds from an aerial view. So you'll be able to see a little better what I'm doing. So I get it kind of all loosened up, hands wet again. Start at the top. And take both hands, scooping from the sides about 1/4 of the way down, and I pull up until it lets go from the bottom and folds under itself. So it's kind of like you are rolling it. Once it's about to the middle, another 1/4, so to speak, then I'm gonna turn and do the same thing on this end. So about 1/4 down from the top, lift until it pulls away and tucks under. Again and again. So now it's got 2 kind of rolls. And then I go and do it on the other sides. So each of the 4 sides gets stretched and folded. It's pretty good. And this is 1 stretch and fold. I will then let it sit another 40 minutes and do it again. And that will be my second set. Okay, and recover. I love stretch and folds. They're super fun. All right, second stretch and fold. potentially the final one. Look at Okay, so you can see now it is really, really grown. Lots of big bubbles, and it's getting pretty close. So because this shaping process takes time, like about 30 to 40 minutes, I'm gonna start shaping now. And by about the time they go into the fridge, they will be ready. Okay, so now that you've seen what the dough looks like at this point, I'm gonna walk you through a little bit of how I decided that it's time to shape. So the first thing I did was I took the temperature when I began bulk fermentation, and that was at 9:15 this morning, and it was 73 degrees. By 2:15, it had gone down to 71 degrees, and that's kind of where it stayed. So I basically gauged it at like 72 degrees. Then from this chart, if I calculate in here, that would be at about 10 hours at 72 degrees. But big dough, bulk ferments a little quicker. I know my dough tends to sometimes go a little longer than this. And then also thinking through how long it's gonna take me to shape it all. My goal that I kind of decided to gauge at was about 9 hours for when I wanna be shaping it. And so it's been 8 hours for 5:15. So I'm gonna get it somewhere in that sweet spot of between 8 to 9 hours. It'll be into the fridge. So that's kind of how I'm deciding to call the bulk fermentation, and also looking at the dough itself and what I saw it looking like and smelling like. And when I'm poking it, those are all things that help me know. And this is my little station here where I'm gonna dump the dough. These are my bannetons from Rose Hill Sourdough. They're wood pulp bannetons. I just lightly dust them with rice flour, Thai rice flour, rub it in, and they are good to go. They're awesome, reusable, and the dough won't stick. And they keep it at the perfect level of moisture for the artistic scoring. So not too dried out, but also not too moist. And then I cover them with reusable bowl covers that I have. So I'm reducing my use of plastic. I used to use shower caps, but for this I realized I could just use the reusable bowl covers, which was an idea from someone, and I thought super cool. So I'm gonna dump out my dough right here, start cutting it and portioning it, and then shaping it into the bannetons. Comes right out. Good sign when it does that. I added up the total weight of all the ingredients that went into this, divided by 14, because that's how many I'm making, and it's about 768 grams each. So that's what I'm trying to weigh out here as I go. Try to cut it here so you can see. $6.70. But that works. to go. And I pop the bubbles so that there aren't any pockets, so that when we go to score, it doesn't cut and create a bubble that kind of looks funny. So I pop mine. Some people don't like that because they like the blisters, but this is for the art, so you need a smooth canvas. Okay, now I've got them all set up over here. I'll show them in a second, but I let them sit. I'm gonna do another like 5 minutes of sitting and then start at the beginning. The first one I shaped, I'm going to stitch to tighten them up a little more. Okay, so I happen to be lucky enough to have a wonderful aunt that made me all of these bowl covers, and these are what I'm going to use as I get these covered up. So I'm going to start with the one I shaped first, and what I do is I first pop any more bubbles that are maybe really large, and then stitch this messy kind of spread part up so that it's a nice tighter bowl and just a little cleaner looking. Ta-da! And then cover with a bowl cover, and into the fridge these will go. Ta-da! And there you have it. These will all now get placed into my fridge and mini fridge. What I do is I stack. I have like a wire rack from the mini fridge I put on top of 4, and then I stack another layer. So I can show what that looks like as well. But all done. Ta-da! There they are. So that's my little mini fridge rack. All set. Woo!